COVID pandemic has transformed the way we work. The onset of the pandemic saw a complete shift to remote work, and now we are transitioning to what many of us are calling hybrid work. The experience of the past 2 years, the how, the where, and the when of work is changing for employees, and so is the why. How should startups approach this change? Sangeeta Bavi, the Director of Startup Ecosystems at Microsoft India, caught up with Jayant Paleti, the co-founder of Darwinbox, and Yamini Bhat, the co-founder and CEO of Vymo, to gather their insights and top of mind.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Microsoft Future Ready Startup Week. One thing is very clear post pandemic is we are not the same people who went to office in 2020. As more people experience the upsides of working flexible, working remote, this is weighing in heavily in terms of the worth it equation. The Gen Zs and millennials have already decided that there's no going back for them. And the challenge ahead for us as leaders and for every organization is we need to meet employees where they are and at the same time do the balancing act of meeting the business outcomes in a very unpredictable economy. I'm Sangeeta Bavi and I lead the digital natives business for Microsoft in India. I'm extremely excited to be here today to engage in a conversation with Jayant Paleti, co-founder of Darwinbox, and Yamini Bhat, co-founder and CEO of Vymo. A very warm welcome to you both, and thank you so much for joining us for the Microsoft Future Ready Startup Week. Jayant and Yamini, both of you have disrupted existing categories of HCM and CRM sales automation by literally redefining what's relevant for today's younger workforce. Your product and offering is simpler, easy to use, and it has a mobile-first ethos. We would love to hear from you your journey about your organization, especially during these tough times. Yamini, why don't we start with you first?
Thank you, Sangeeta. Very excited to be here. I remember during Feb 2020 when we were taking the call that COVID was real and we probably had to switch to remote first for, without foresight onto how long that might be. We reacted fast enough. The org moved into a remote only model instantly. I remember it was March 11th or so. And everything that we had to learn to do right, we had to figure it out from there, right? By just jumping into the deep end first. The managing customers remotely actually turned out to be the easier part of it. We thought that would take a big hit given we target large enterprise customers and massive user bases, and there's quite a bit of face-to-face interaction, but they adapted fairly quickly to this given they were also going through this. Over the last 2.5 years, I can say the journey has been in like 5 different stages for us, figuring out the processes across the org and how we interacted with each other. That had to be cleaned up first. Solving the known problem part of the window. Right. Then data and information that folks needed to be able to work effectively. That was the second part, right? And this is where we became very tools first in how we operate. Brought in a lot more tools into place to help with this and enable this. Third, so data and information is what you need at that moment in time to make a decision, right? Being able to bring knowledge of the company together and pass that on to like the next generation of people who are taking on these roles. That became the more complicated part because knowledge is usually in the heads of most of the tenured folks, and they needed to make a significant investment in taking time out to capture this, document this, and put it into a format that is consumable, right? After that, mentorship became the fourth stage, where being able to mentor folks towards their success in a remote first model, because it's not just about manager and you. It's many other forms of support that folks need to be successful across different skill sets, right? Somewhere there is where we are at this point in time. At this point in time, we are now looking at the fifth stage, which is being able to, now that we know hybrid is going to stay, because it's post the pandemic and 70% of the team has voted to being remote first, right? Even if they're in Bangalore, there is a little bit of being in office only twice a day or so, even within the big hubs like Bangalore. So we know that hybrid is going to stay, and what we are working on is bringing in a sense of belonging, and it goes beyond the vision, mission, and purpose, right? Because that's what you look at when you are joining a company, but you stay because you feel like you belong. And if you think about it, the fact that folks give 8 to 9 hours a day to Vymo, and 8 to 9 hours is like sleep time, so you're kind of giving 50% of your they practically to the company. You need to believe that this is what the social aspect of you will really like, and therefore the sense of belonging, right? And we are taking steps here now and trying to carve this out.
No, great to hear that, Yamini. And I'll talk a little bit more about the work trend index that Microsoft basically has published recently. Resonates very much with what you said. But Jayant, over to you to hear your journey so far.
So in a lot of ways, first, Sangeeta, thanks for having me here as well. Our journey in a lot of ways parallels what Yamini sort of mentioned. A few things, right? Personally, for me, the last 2 years have been a challenge. And personal anecdote is that for the longest time, a lot of work from home proposals came to our tables. And I was always the guy unanimously vetoing them pre-pandemic, saying, no, this is not going to work for us. We are not that kind of a company. And then March 2020 happens and you're staring at this situation where you have no choice but to be remote. And one thing that you realize is the human capacity to evolve when put in situations that are beyond your control, right? And it is not just with me. I had to change. The org had to change, but I saw that in action so many times at customer and client places. Orgs that have operated in a certain way for the last 20 years, in a week had to change their operating model, and they did, right? I think one thing that we have to give is the human capacity to evolve if they're put under circumstances beyond your control, right? But that being said, I keep joking that pre-March 2020, we used to have 8 offices globally, and we have now 800 offices. So each of our employees, wherever they are, there's an office that we have, and we have to ensure that is it the pristine sort of an environment for him to deliver to his potential. I think that's been the attempt, and our own journey was internally. How do you initially in the first 3 or 4 months, how do you use technology in whatever form or fashion to ensure that your employees' health and well-being is taken care of? So that's what we attempted in the early days. The second phase was how do we get to productivity while being remote, right? And this is not something that we were used to. We were used to sitting across from each other, have a question, turn around and say, "Hey guys, what do you think we should do?" From that to a model where we don't have each other around. How do you ensure that you hit a certain level of productivity while you're working from home? And third was I think this was maybe productivity was still December 2020, and from January 2021 was all about how do you engage employees really well during this sort of new normal. It became increasingly clear that this was here to stay, right? While working from office would start at some juncture, but this hybrid sort of era will continue. So how do you ensure that employees are engaged really, really well at home? So how do you use technologies to sort of do that? And of course, a bunch of basic infrastructure that we had to set in place. I think at the 2020 sort of time frame, we also took a call to move to the Microsoft ecosystem fully. And in some sense, by the time this happened, we were in some sense, at least we had the basic infrastructure, the tools ready and in place for doing remote. And in a lot of ways, Teams has become meaning a screen that we stare at for significant chunks of the day. 60-70% of our clients use Teams or the Microsoft ecosystem. We internally use it as well. So that's become one more way to engage with anybody, right? It could be a customer, it could be a colleague. And now the last thing is with now it's not just fully remote. Become clear that at least for us, Yamini, we took a call that fully remote is not going to work in our context. So we're encouraging or nudging people to come back. So we've started opening our offices globally in all geographies. At least a few days a week, everybody has to be here, and we believe a mix of remote plus coming to office is the ideal combination going forward for a variety of reasons, right? It could be culture. It could be ultimately we are social animals. It's important to be social. The last mile employees' ability to build a bond with the company for all these reasons. The last comment that I wanted to make was around demand overall. I think in a lot of ways the impetus to digitize amongst all our potential customers has been extremely high. And we operate in terms of geographies, we operate in Asia. historically pre-pandemic enough number of times where people came back to us and said, we want to transform, but we want to do it later. Let's wait. But post, I think March 2020, this the impetus to be digital is so much more higher. All those guys who said that in the past coming back and telling us, we want to transform, tell us how, and we want to do it now. And the biggest change that I'm seeing in terms of the thinking is being digital was a way that most companies reacted to the pandemic in the early days because technology was the only way you could react to a situation of that format. The biggest change starting late 2021 was how can digital actually be like the base or the foundation of my strategy going forward. That's the biggest change in thinking. It was one a reactionary measure in 2020, early 21, but late 21, 22, it's become how can this become the cornerstone of my business strategy going forward. Right? So that's the biggest change in thinking that I've seen personally.
No, great to hear that, Jayant. And as you were talking about your own journey in terms of how you were not a big champion of flexible or remote working to where Darwinbox is today. Also, as a product, as a platform, you deliver a lot of these personalized employee experiences. You enable organizations to make very better and sharper decisions across the talent life cycle for these organizations. What do you think some of these customers of yours, where will they face challenges as they snap onto a hybrid way of working?
One Sangeeta, of course, there are operational challenges, which is, and maybe I'll not focus that much on the operational parts, right? Which is how do you ensure that the right teams come together all on the same day? Which is if you're working for 2 days a week, it should not be a situation where an employee comes to work that day, or sorry, he's on Microsoft Teams the entire day, right? There's no point doing that. He's coming to office that day. How do we ensure that the ecosystem that he's working with, they're in office that day? So coordination around those fundamental things. Second, basics like how do you manage productivity while working from home, productivity while being in office? How do you ensure while fully remote meetings are okay, fully physical meetings are okay, a combination of physical and maybe online is not a great combination. So how do you ensure those meetings are productive? So there are a bunch of operational hassles that need to get accounted for. Those, of course, there are enough things that we built on product. There are enough tools, platforms that we have deployed internally to account for a bunch of those things. But maybe I'll focus on things that are slightly more softer and subtle, right? And a few challenges that and one advantage that we have is we have a unique vantage point that we work with 700 customers, 1.6 million employees that love and use our product every day, and we get access to what the CHROs or the leadership are thinking there. So two or three common themes that I hear. One, a lot more siloing in organizations, right? Which is if you're working most of the day, you're working with your team. And in a normal office sort of a setup where, you'll meet somebody at the water cooler, you'll sit with somebody across the table for lunch, and cross-functional interactions are a lot higher. During the pandemic, it was mostly around doing work with your teams. I'll do my daily transactions, I'll work with my team, and I'll move on. And the consequence of that has been a lot of siloing, functions not talking enough with each other, functions not necessarily having each other's backs, and which is something, by the way, we personally experienced in Darwinbox as well. That we grew dramatically. Our heads count, we tripled in terms of size during the pandemic, and the pandemic didn't permit for a lot of cross-functional interaction, and the consequence is a lot of siloing. Right? How do you sort of solve for that? The second is aspects around culture that are tough to sort of morph. Right? And while remote is great for efficiency, your day seems far more productive. Your day is precisely sorted into 30, 45 minute and 60-minute slots. You feel that you're doing a lot more in a day. But what you realize is when you're in an office sort of a setup, in a meeting, you sometimes break and say, you talk about things that are far beyond work. You look at your colleague and say, I know your mother was not doing too well 3 weeks ago. Is she okay now? Or like I said, you'll run into somebody at the water cooler that in terms of hierarchy that you'll normally never meet. You'll say, man, it's been so long since I last met you at the offsite. How's it going? Is it okay? And micro interactions like these are super, super important for culture. and they are not happening enough. So enough companies that came back and said things that we want to drive, values that we want to define in terms of culture, were we able to achieve them fully during the pandemic? Not that much. So that's the second area. The third, of course, is a consequence of the second, is because you're not able to build like a bond to the final level that you were able to with an employee, right? It has led to, in fact, I believe that there is a correlation between the pandemic and the Great Resignation, and if you look at the data, attrition numbers indicate that most of the attrition is happening for vintages that are less than 3 years in the system. That also reflects that maybe for the last 3 years, the folks that have joined the company in the last 3 years have not been able to build that kind of a bond that we were able to in normal circumstances. And the moment they have the slightest bit of dissonance, they say, "Hey, why should we do this? We can move on. Enough things going on in life." So a few things like this that come out as critical call outs. Right? Like I said, one, siloing; two, not optimum sort of things around culture that companies wanted to drive. The third, the last mile bond with employees not happening to the degree that companies want. The consequences, employees not staying.
Very rightly said, Jayant and Yamini. In fact, Microsoft published its annual work trend index report, and an interesting paradox came up called the hybrid work paradox. So, not surprising, about 70% employees have said that they want more flexible work from home options. But at the same time, roughly about 67 or 70% of the employees are saying that they want more in-person collaboration, right? Those micro conversations, the water cooler conversations. Typically in a meeting, before the meeting starts, a few minutes before the meeting, you end up having these small conversations, which people definitely miss in the video conferencing world. So building on what both of you said, right? What we learned from the study was that leaders need to now start thinking about three key aspects. One is the social capital, second is the knowledge capital, and third is the human capital. And these three pillars are going to be driving how we define culture in the hybrid way of working as we go forward. Just to give you a very simple example of how we are driving social capital in Microsoft, every business needs to now start looking at driving these world-class forms of both asynchronous and synchronous communication, right? To make sure that culture remains constant across the organization. In Microsoft, what we have done is we record all the meetings. And this is, in fact, the fastest growing content type that we have. And employees now expect the information which is recorded in the meetings available across recordings, transcripts, and highlights. And they want to consume it when it is convenient for them. So some of them don't even join some of these meetings. So Yamini, moving to you, I know that Vymo has this ability to capture all the digital signals from sales engagement across the various channels, and then also translate these into actionable nudges for a remote first world, right? What are your observations on how customers are increasing social capital in the hybrid world across both employees and the customers that they are reaching out to?
Yeah. So in Vymo, usually Vymo works with sales teams, right? So there are about 250,000 salespeople who use Vymo every day. And even the premise of starting Vymo was that culture in sales orgs was way too top-down, focused on trying to get some form of information back into systems like CRMs, etc., to be able to analyze what could be done, right? But this was very minimal information since most of these tools had 10 to 20% adoption, and it did not really capture what was happening in a seller's life. And if you see what's happening in a seller's life, even digitally, they have to go through 8 to 10 systems. If you think of where their goals are, where their comp plans are, where their customer information is, where their L&D modules are, where their collateral is sitting, where their fulfillment systems are, etc. They have to go through 6 to 10 systems to actually get through their day productively. Right, and it is near impossible to therefore just look at one system like a CRM and figure out how to improve sales productivity. Now, what in general, Vymo's premise was built on the fact that we need to make it easy, first of all, uh, to meet your sales outcomes and grow as a salesperson. For that, we need to make it easy to understand where action is happening and whether that's adequate or inadequate, and be able to guide you directly on what you could do better, right? In an org, some of our customers are the largest insurers and banks within the countries that we operate, like Tokyo Marine in Japan, or Berkshire in the US, or HDFC Bank or SBI in India, right? And in orgs like this, which are massive in terms of their sales organizations, it's near impossible to assume that entire growth and productivity of sellers is limited to managers having face-to-face time with them, right? Even before the pandemic, it was our premise was that is impossible to be just do justice on. Post-pandemic, it's table stakes now. Leaders already acknowledge the fact that, hey, I need to get more information on how to help my sales teams, individuals on the field, and I need ways to be able to guide them on the go, not really depend on interaction with their managers once a week or coaching sessions once a month, etc. They've anyway made themselves very async in terms of salespeople's development, and try to get context, material, and information for success and support for success to the seller at the moment they need it, right? But what was really eye-opening for us during the pandemic, somewhere midway after the first and nearly second wave were done, we started seeing that across these, at that point in time, probably 150 or 200,000 sellers, right? Almost half of our customers, and usually all the leading customers, right, all the number ones in these markets, all the market leaders, decided to, in FY20, somewhere in FY21, decided to change goal setting from top down in sales orgs to bottom up. They actually asked 10,000, 20,000 salespeople in their teams, right, to set their own goals, which was amazing because for the first time and bunch of them are in Asia, many of them are in markets like Japan and US. Culture is very different, right? US is very much more enablement oriented culture. Asia was very, manage and control. Japan was also very is also very, top-down culture, right? But culture across the board kind of shifted, and folks started saying that while we need to manage and control, while we need to know how to enable them, we want them to start taking ownership, because in a remote first world, there is no way you can actually tell a person that I want you to achieve this without having a deep understanding of their context. 10,000 sellers are working in 10,000 different territories at different tenures with different customer segments, trying to sell different kinds of products. Context is very, very different. Competition is local, as well as you can't have that contextual, that much context to be able to be realistic, right? So they went ahead and said, here are your comp plans. Now you set your targets, and we will come back and figure out, tell you how you can achieve that in the easiest possible way, right? Our philosophy at Vymo and even outside is that what you do it with the least effort way. You can do more with our goal is to make it easy for you to do more, right? So if a salesperson can achieve, a 40-hour weeks worth of impact just by doing 20 calls that we nudge them towards, right? We would be super proud. Take the rest of the time, do whatever you want. You've met your comp plans, go spend time with your family, go play piano, whatever that is, right? And we believe the same within our company also, that, hey, you set your OKRs, you tell us what's achievable. Here is the business problem that we are pointing you towards, right? We need to solve this for our customers. Now you tell us, to be able to solve that, what needs to get done by when, and how do we do it, right? Be most real about this. So in Vymo, there is a trifecta of 3 things that folks are supposed to own, even folks in engineering or folks farthest away that you might consider from customer, even in design, etc. You're always tagged to a customer account. You're not actually directly in customer service, but you're tagged to a customer account, even if you're in R&D, because this is your, North Star customer for being able to be real on what you're building. You're always tagged to your functional goal, right? Which could be an NPS related goal or a DAO related goal, right? Or a bookings related goal. And you're always tagged to a business goal, right? Which is one of the key KPIs that matters to the company. And therefore you get exposed to business, you get exposed to what is real and unreal for the customer. Do not try to copy what you think is none of that is needed. Competition really doesn't matter when you're creating a new category, right? Customer matters a lot more. And then do it in a way that you're progressing within your own function. And being able to expose them to these 3 things, and then letting them set their own milestones and show us what is possible, has actually worked out way better than trying to be top down about this. And that's what I've seen customers shift on, and even we've started believing internally.
Wow, that's great. A lot more empowerment and accountability is what's also driving some of these behavioral changes. So that brings me to the second dimension of the discussion, which is knowledge management, right? Continuous learning. In this fast-moving, fast-paced tech world, we focus a lot more in terms of how do we build that tech intensity and skilling for all our employees. Be it peer learning, be it classroom training, virtual training. But a lot of the organizations are facing challenges in terms of saying that, hey, how quickly can we acquire new knowledge and also diffuse this knowledge across the entire organization? How do we enable employee to employee learning? How do we drive mentoring and coaching? And especially in this new hybrid environment. So, Jen, Darwinbox basically sells across it's used across so many millions of employees across the world. Uh, how are you seeing that organizations are solving for these questions related to knowledge management, learning? What is it that Darwinbox is basically doing to enable and make it easier for organizations?
But Sangeeta, you said it really, really well. That the rate of change is so much more rapid now than ever before, I think. And there is any large organization that you go to, any leader that you go to now clearly says that maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? If you'd created some great IP, you'd created a unique business model, you were able to monetize that over an extended period of time. 10 years, 15 years, you were able to monetize that. Now, every 3 years, unless you relook at your business model and you tweak it, you're no longer relevant, right? You're no longer competitive. So enough companies that are coming back and saying we have to change constantly for us to be relevant, and which is something now. And the consequence of that is if an org has to change at a very very rapid pace, how can it change if its employees are not changing? And which is why I think the importance of the L&D function now is so much more higher than ever before in history. Something that we try to evangelize, and we keep telling companies your L&D budgets have to rise dramatically. If your people have to scale, they have to upskill themselves so that the org scales and remains relevant. Start investing. And personally, Sangeeta, it is true for a founder as well, right? Meaning as a company scales over time, every year you have to become a much better version of yourself. So I personally have a learning model that seems to have worked for me, which I try to sort of replicate in the Darwinbox context as well, right? And there are three things for me in terms of how do you keep learning. The first is keep getting great exposure. Is that a great podcast? Is that great books? Is that entrepreneurs that you have super high regard for? We've done that before already. So can you just keep getting exposed to things like this, of this format, so that you learn, you become better. You don't have to always learn by following. You can learn from other people. So that's why, meaning Yamini and I talk. There are enough of us in the SaaS ecosystem in terms of founder groups that talk. So first is just keep getting exposed. The second is putting yourself in situations where you're required to elevate yourself. So every year, I think, and we've done that with Darwinbox, every year going after the next level of client. Not going after that kind of client where you will break, but the kind of client that where you have to stretch yourself, where you're required to elevate yourself in terms of the selling motion, the marketing motion, the delivery motion, and the product motion. But it is an achievable sort of a set. So constantly putting yourself in situations where you're required to elevate yourself, right? And growth almost always happens outside the comfort zone, if not at the edge of the comfort zone. The last, I think, thing about learning or scaling is I've always believed that you learn and you scale if you scale somebody else under you. If people under you scale, or at people at your level, you become a mentor for them and they scale, you automatically scale. So I think so. And the Darwinbox learning program is also designed around somewhat these three pillars. That for your role, what kind of an exposure do you need so that constantly you keep getting better? The second, can we give projects to you that are over and beyond what you have to do from your regular KPIs that'll help you elevate yourself? The third is boss mentor, right? You could be 1 year in the system, you might not have reportees. Of course, mentoring for managers, HODs is fairly clear. But even guys that have no reportees under them, meaning if that is something that they do, we say that'll automatically become something that we consider when you're considering you for a promotion. Things of this format, and of course the tools required for doing that. So can you have systems that will help you deliver bite-sized learning? Doing it on a far more continuous basis versus doing it, hey, let's do it every quarter sort of a thing. And ensuring that it is aligned to org outcomes, as opposed to one guy coming and saying, I want this because it's my personal interest and for nothing else. So ultimately, it has to be aligned around what the org needs are and what org outcomes are oriented around. So broadly, right? So
Yeah, no, great point. I literally feel in this world you need to rehire yourself for the next job every 2 or 3 years, right? It's
absolutely.
become that fast paced, and that comes to the sort of final section, which is one of, I think, the most important relevant points of human capital wellness, mental well-being. We have seen a dramatic sort of shift happening in this space. And especially, I'm going to ask this question to both of you because for entrepreneurs, it's been even more difficult. But we've seen that fatigue, we've seen that digital fatigue, the back-to-back meeting challenges affect our mental well-being. The sitting in front of the screen and having a very monotonous kind of life in the last 2 years has taken a toll on everyone. And managers, leaders now need to think about wellness of their people as literally the first hygiene priority when you're engaging with your teams. So Yamini, Vymo does a lot of this. The technology itself basically empowers managers to intervene at the right moment, coach the teams proactively to enhance sales productivity. And you briefly touched upon how it is done, but how do you think organizations can start using technologies like these to help drive a lot of employee wellness and well-being amongst their teams and organizations?
Both in Vymo's own internal context as well as in our customer context, right? We talked earlier, Sangeeta, about being able to drive empowerment and accountability. If folks pick what they want to move towards, there's a much higher sense of ownership. We've seen this across the board. I remember even 5 years ago, we put customers, there's this whole debate on should we build this feature, not build this feature, why this, why that, show me the impact, show me the outcomes, right? And we just brought 5 clients into the room, made 5 different, in 5 different rooms, had our product and engineering folks and customer success folks engage with these customers and actually write out the roadmap for themselves. And we realized that there was a 90% overlap in what was written, and there was 100% achievement in what was actually executed versus doing this top down, right? So from then on, the culture has been, we probably spend I individually personally spend for every person directly reporting to me almost 100 hours in hiring, and then probably 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours in the whole year in actually guiding them, right? Because you overinvest. And once you have got that right, you're bringing the right kind of people with the right skill sets as well as culture fit for your org, it's important to make sure that they take ownership and they understand what's at stake, right? Once you've done that, Vymo tries to propagate the same thing amongst our customers, right? Let them set their goals. There's a higher chance you'll actually overachieve the final outcome, right? And it's proven that too over years now because clients have stuck with that in FY22, planning that in FY23, etc. So that would be the general direction that we would go in, right? Having said that, specifically because you brought up mental health, right? There is definitely a need to have parallel tracks to catch what's not working, because in all of these are processes that ensure a general level of hygiene across the org on employees being engaged, involved, and goal-oriented, and purposeful, and mindful in what they're doing, right? So, ENPS, for example, gives you a point in time, how is everyone feeling? There are tools which help you manage emotional sentiment at any point in time in the journey, 30 days and 60 days and etc. So there are journey-based tools that are available. But definitely, Vymo has signed up. We've encouraged our clients to go also with employee assistance program, which can catch the worst case scenarios, because problems could not just be because of the work environment. They could be a myriad mix of many things coming together at the same time. First 6 months of COVID, There were very extreme scenarios. We were very lucky to catch, thanks to someone actually recommending EAP to us and us instituting that across the org, right? Very extreme scenarios that we were able to catch where folks were just not able to cope with isolation or the new context that they were expected to live in, which is like full-time being at home is not a happy place for many people, right? So definitely a need for that, which probably, you can't lean on the same set of tools for all the solutions, but an org needs to think through what its catch-all could be and have that in place.
No, super. One thing I realized is this whole hybrid way of working is no longer a level playing field, right? When all of us came to office, all of us had a similar work environment, whereas now it's completely changed. One message that you would have, Yamini and Jayant, to your fellow founders, to people who are basically struggling through getting the hybrid way of working going, one for the organization and one for the leaders in terms of driving mental well-being. Would love to hear from both of you.
In general, right, I feel I have evolved, and Jan's comment also, right, that we evolve a lot as we build out companies, right? When it was 100 people and town hall was basically jamming all of them into a hotel ballroom, that was okay, right? That was different way of being able to communicate. I feel at this stage, for companies of our stage and our scale and the pace at which we are still growing, right, even at this scale and size, it's extremely important that we are very mindful in terms of who comes into the org, though it's happening at scale. We have to figure that out. And we have to be extremely mindful of the fact that people feel they belong. This is going to be more and more intense, 24 hours. How many calls can you fit in to engage with someone? You just won't be able to do it. Therefore, a sense of belonging is a decentralized thing that has to happen within the org. Folks have to find connections way beyond their functions, way beyond their immediate purpose, and feel like there are at least, I used to tell in large enterprise sales that a customer needs to hear about Vymo from 5 different sources before Vymo shows up. Right, one of the source always has been Microsoft for us, Sangeeta. Thank you. But now I feel like an employee needs to have 5 other reasons for being at Vymo, 5 other deep links, which are just beyond just their work and their OKRs and their manager. Right? And I think that's important just for mental well-being as well as just for employees sticking with you, right, over time. And org will be the biggest differentiator. It's actually probably, it's not product anymore at our life stage, right? Yes, we have created new categories. Yes, we have momentum. But the reason we will win is because the whole org is moving at a very fast pace towards one goal.
Great. Thanks, Yamini. Jayant?
So my 2 cents are, one, I think just generally over communicate. So historically, I think there was a certain level at which you communicated across each probably aspect of the life cycle. How do you onboard? How can you do your check-ins? For example, the frequency of your town halls. I think when in doubt, just over communicate. I think that's been a major learning from the last 2 years, right? Which is, if you're doing a check-in every 30 days with your maybe with a critical new hire that you did in a department, maybe do it with a slightly higher frequency. And for example, town halls work. And for example, we've tried to increase the avenues for informal interaction. The last 2 months, 3 months, generally doing offsite so that people can come together. Hey, you're shorter than what I expected. You're longer than what I expected. Some of these conversations happening, right? And conversations beyond work that sort of happen. And I completely agree with Yamini on one thing she said, that people will stay with a company for reasons far beyond just work. Right? It's not just about work. There is no perfect JD on the planet. Maybe there is a JD that is manager of an exotic beach island, which is a 100% perfect JD that gives you joy. But there is always going to be parts of your JD that will not give you joy. Right? And then there'll be parts of your JD that will give you so much joy that everything else you're okay with. And but when there are some of these moments where you're doing work that is not giving you enough joy, there should be other touch points in a company. You should have friends at work. You should have a boss that cares for you. You should have a HOD that is deeply invested in seeing you be successful. So things like this that go beyond work that will ensure that somebody stays back. And this is so much more truer now in the era of the Great Resignation. It's an employee market. It's not an employer market anymore. So reasons far beyond just the JD will be anchors around which why somebody, him or her, will stay back with the company.
No, absolutely. And Also, the culture of every manager, every leader exhibiting this whole model coach care behavior is going to go a long way for that organization, right? Leaders need to empower managers to be the culture keepers, to rethink what is the role of the office, and literally rebuild those three pillars of your social knowledge and human capital. And while technology will continue to play a very key role in this, it needs literally a reset and rehiring of leaders as they are thinking about making hybrid happen. But Jayant and Yamini, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thanks, Jayant.
Thank you, Sangeeta.